The first thing Commander Sethovrix said when he walked into my equipment bay was something I couldn't translate, but his two junior inspectors laughed, so I assumed it wasn't a compliment. I was standing next to Bay Rack 7 at the time, the one with the patched carry cases, the hand-wound field coil, and the manual pressure compensator that looked, I'll admit, like someone had built it in a hurry out of parts that were lying around. Which is because someone had. That someone was me. 18 months prior, on Outpost El Len, when the Verada-made precision rig would been issued decided that the local atmospheric variance was outside its operational envelope and simply stopped working. I hadn't patched it up because I was proud of it. I'd patched it up because that's what you do when the thing stops working and you still have a job to finish. Sethovrix moved along the rack with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who wanted you to know how much time he was willing to spend being disappointed. He was tall. They all were, the Veradi, with that Legitan look along the forearms and the pale optical clusters that caught light in a way that made you feel observed from 6 directions at once. His uniform was spotless. His equipment kit, when his aides had rolled it in on their handling sled, had gleamed under the bay lights like it had never been touched by an atmosphere. He paused at the compensator. "This is your field-rated pressure management unit." His translator gave the words a flat, clean quality, but the pauses he put around field-rated were doing something else entirely. "That's the one," I said. He picked it up with 2 fingers, the way you'd pick up something you weren't sure was sanitary, and turned it under the overhead lamp. The patch on the casing, a thermal bonding strip, grey, slightly puckered at one edge, caught the light. "It has been repaired," he said. "Several times." One of the junior inspectors said something again. More laughter, quickly professionalized. Sethovrix set the compensator down with the careful gentleness of a man who decided it wasn't worth putting in his report just yet. "We will proceed to the formal review," he said. The formal review was held in the main inspection floor of Careth Knoll Central Platform, a room large enough to fit a mid-size vessel with clearance to spare. The Veradi had brought their full equipment suite. I had brought mine. The contrast was not subtle. Their calibration rig alone was the size of a ground vehicle, matte black housing, articulated sensor arms, a cooling system that hummed at a frequency I felt more in my back teeth than my ears. The display surface showed readings in 4 spectrums simultaneously. It had, according to the spec sheet their aide had handed me before the session, a tolerance range of plus or minus 0.003 microns. I had a crate. In the crate, the compensator. A set of hand-filed calibration blocks in a foam insert that I'd cut myself. A pressure gauge I'd bought from a supply reseller at Torreth Station with my own money because the issued one had a sticky needle. 2 rolls of thermal strip. A multi-tool with the secondary blade snapped off, which I'd never gotten around to replacing. Sethovrix's aide logged all of it. I watched her optical clusters move across the crate's contents, the way you'd watch someone writing a review they'd already decided the score for. The first 3 hours were straightforward. Both rigs ran the standard atmospheric pressure sequence, the load tolerance series, the seal failure simulation. The Veradi rig produced results on a display in 3 colors with confidence intervals. My rig produced results on a printed strip from a thermal recorder that I'd had since my second posting and had never once given me a wrong number. The panel, 6 Veradi, 2 human observers from the compact liaison office, and a wall-mounted recording apparatus that I'd been told was not surveillance but definitely was, watched all of it with varying degrees of polite attention. At the end of the 3rd sequence, Sethovrix looked at my printed strip and at his display with an expression I had no difficulty reading across species lines. "Comparable results," he said, in a tone that implied comparable was a word he was using out of professionalism rather than accuracy. "We will proceed to the high variance sequence." The high variance sequence was where equipment that was designed to handle the expected range of operational conditions got to demonstrate that it had been designed to handle the expected range of operational conditions. The Veradi rig was built for it. The spec sheet made clear it had been tested in 17 environments across 6 systems and had never recorded a deviation outside parameters. I'd done the high variance sequence before, usually somewhere unpleasant, with bad weather, and someone telling me over a comm channel that they needed the results an hour ago. We ran it. Both rigs handled the first pressure tier without difficulty. The second tier, I noticed Sethovrix watching my compensator the way an audience watches a juggler they're hoping will drop something. Nothing dropped. The strip kept printing. My gauge sat steady. Third tier. The Veradi rig processed the sequence, hit the spike at the top of tier 3, a rapid pressure climb of the sort you'd see in a compromised airlock scenario or a hull integrity event, and the display went from 3 colors to 1 color, which was red, and then to no color, which was off. The hum from the cooling system changed pitch. One of the sensor arms retracted to its rest position with a sound that was not quite a click but was adjacent to one. The display surface stayed dark. Sethevriks looked at his rig. Then at his aide. Then at the rig again. A pressure spike outside the rated operational envelope, his aide said, reading from a secondary display on her handheld. The system requires recalibration before re-engagement. How long? Sethevriks said. Estimated 40 minutes for a clean reset. In the inspection room at Careth Knoll, with the panel and the 2 liaison office observers and the recording apparatus that was definitely surveillance, nobody said anything for about 4 seconds. I picked up my compensator. What are you doing? Sethevriks said. It wasn't quite a question. The test sequence is still running, I said. I'm going to finish it. I set the compensator into the pressure port on my test manifold, a connection I'd machined by hand at Outpost Del Len to accept the non-standard thread pitch of the compensator housing, because the housing had come off a different manufacturer's unit and someone at the supply depot had told me it was close enough. It was close enough. I'd verified that over about 8 months of field use. I opened the manual bypass on the gauge and watched the needle climb. The compensator had a tactile feedback system, a deliberate design choice from about 60 years ago, when the original engineers had decided that if you were in conditions bad enough to need a manual pressure compensator, you probably couldn't read a display. You felt it in your palm. When the compensator was in range, there was a slight resistance change, almost a catch, like a well-made lock cylinder finding its position. I felt it find the position. Holding, I said, to no one in particular, and read the needle. Within tolerance. I ran the rest of Tier 3 with the compensator in hand, reading the needle, adjusting by feel, printing on the thermal strip. It took 11 minutes. The strip came out with a deviation at the top of the spike of plus or minus 0.031 microns, not as tight as the Varadi rig's 3-color display, but well within the operational standard the joint inspection was benchmarking against. I tore the strip off the recorder and set it on the table next to the dark display of the Varadi rig. The room was quiet. Not the silence of people who were thinking about what to say next. The other kind. One of the human liaison officers, a woman named Ferries who I'd met briefly at the pre-session briefing, was writing something in a notebook. She wasn't looking up. The junior inspector who had laughed twice in my equipment bay was looking at a point approximately 2 meters to the left of me with no expression that I could identify. Sethevriks looked at the thermal strip. Then at me. Then, briefly, at the compensator, which I was holding loosely at my side. You have operated that unit manually before, he said. A few times, I said. In field conditions. Mostly. I thought about it. Once in a river. That was a longer day. He did not ask about the river. He picked up the strip and looked at the numbers. He had the expression of someone who had made a statement earlier in the day that he was now considering from several new angles. The human standard for manual field compensated readings, he said, more to the strip than to me, does not require a deviation tighter than 0.04. No, I said. It doesn't. You are within that standard. Yes. Sethevriks set the strip back on the table with a care that I recognized. It was the same care he'd used when he'd set down my compensator in the equipment bay that morning, but the reasoning behind it had changed. We will require 40 minutes for the rig reset, he said. You may take a break. I went and got a coffee from the dispensary at the far end of the floor. It came out of the machine thin and slightly too hot, the way dispensary coffee always does. I drank it standing up, because the chairs were on the other side of the room and I didn't feel like walking over there. When I came back, the Varadi rig was running again, display showing 3 colors, cooling system humming at its usual frequency. Sethevriks was reading my equipment specifications from a data card, the full card, not the summary sheet his aide had handed to my counterpart. One of the junior inspectors was examining the compensator, which I'd left on the table. He was holding it properly this time. Both hands. The formal review concluded 2 hours later. The joint assessment report, which I was given a copy of before I left the platform, noted in its technical annex that the human field equipment had performed within operational standard across all test sequences, including sequences completed under conditions outside the rated envelope of the Compact's primary calibration system. It was accurate language, precise, professional, and in no way embarrassing to anyone. The aide who had logged the contents of my crate, the foam insert, the sticky needled gauge, the multi-tool with the snap blade, did not make eye contact with me when she handed me the report. I took the compensator back to my equipment bay, cleaned it, and put it in the case. It went back on rack 7, next to the patched carry cases and the hand-wound coil, in the same spot it had been when Sethovrix walked in and said whatever it was he'd said that made his inspectors laugh. Nobody had translated it for me. I hadn't asked.